Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations as well as internet radio streams all across the planet, and one of the first podcasts on the internet. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1408 of This Week in Amateur Radio. The FCC now requires that holders of FCC registration numbers, or FRNs, update their contact information within 10 days of a change. We will have all the details. If you are looking for employment, the FCC is now actively recruiting 7 new field agents and electronic engineers. We will have all the details for you. The National Council of Volunteer Examiner Coordinators Question Pool Committee has issued revisions to the 2026 through 2030 Technician Class Question Pool. We will tell you about it. AMSAT announces that a new Full-Duplex HT has hit the market. We will tell you about that, too. The 2025 ICOM Dream Station winner is announced at the Orlando HamCation. Amateur radio assisted as severe weather hit Hawaii recently. The Radio Society of Great Britain releases its new updated band plans. The ARRL is urging amateurs to begin planning now for the upcoming Ham Radio Open House this April as we celebrate World Amateur Radio Day during that month. And Crew 12 arrives at the International Space Station. We will tell you what they'll be doing during their stay in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio. He will tell us why he has had a radio transmitting into a dummy load continuously 24/7 for the last year on purpose. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another new edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us back to 1924, where we find that for nearly a year, hams have been operating in their first assigned band of wavelengths, 150 to 200 meters. They had also been experimenting below 150 meters by special government permission. The story continues in part 2 of a 4-part episode entitled 6 Segments, Sans Spark. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Sawyers, AJ8B in the DX Corner with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters newsroom studio just outside of Albany, New York, where all of the weather guessers on TV and radio are telling us we have a bomb cyclone winter storm about to drop a lot more white refrigerant down on us, and that's a quote. I'm George, W2XBS.
And reporting this week from our news bureau in my humble ham shack in Cortlandville, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
Reporting from beautiful Bradenton, Florida, where I'll be participating in the ARRL International DXCW contest this weekend, I'm Mike Nikolich, K9DXM.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, this is George, Kilo Charlie 2, Oscar X-Ray Juliet.
And reporting from sunny Sandwich, Illinois, I'm Jordan Kurtz, Kilo Echo 9, Bravo, Papa Oscar.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, in the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
Coming to you from a rather nippy but still sunny Space Coast in Florida, I'm Ed Johnson, W2PH.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, where the snow is still coming down, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where we're on the weather roller coaster of temps, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
Hello, everyone. Before we get into this week's newscast, I'd like to tell everyone that This Week in Amateur Radio now has its own Discord server. That's right. a place online where we can discuss everything technology and amateur radio. So join us. Just go to Discord on your computer or download the Discord app on your portable device and search for TWIAR or This Week in Amateur Radio. We look forward to seeing you on the new This Week in Amateur Radio Discord server.
The ARRL reports that the Federal Communications Commission adopted changes to its rules to require that every holder of an FCC registration number, or FRN, update their contact information in the Kurtz system. This includes email and postal addresses, and it must be done within 10 business days of a change. To fill us in on all the details, we go to League headquarters, where John Ross, KD8 IDJ, files this special report.
Because every FCC licensee, including amateur radio operators, must have an FRN to file applications, this requirement applies to all licensed amateurs. FRN contact information is handled separately and apart from contact information related to a license in the license manager system. Both records must be kept up to date, and each requires a separate update. Until now, no specific deadline existed for updating FRN or license contact information. Instead, the amateur rules at sections 97.21 and 97.23 provide that a license may be suspended or revoked if FCC correspondence is returned as undeliverable because of an incorrect address or email. These provisions remain in effect, as well as the 10-day deadline applicable to FRN information. If your FRN information is current and is not changed, no immediate action is required, but you must adhere to the 10-day rule for future changes. It is recommended to periodically check both the Kurtz and the license manager systems to ensure contact information is accurate even if no changes have been occurred. The new deadline became effective on February 5th as part of the proceeding that was limited to further constraining robocalls. Although the proceeding focused on robocall issues, the 10-day update requirement applies broadly to all FRN holders. On February 6th, the FCC confirmed in a public notice that the new deadline applies to all FRN holders. The amendment replaces language adopted in 2001 that required FRN holders to keep their contact information up to date, but had not imposed a deadline for doing so. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Numerous requests for clarification from non-robocall interests led the FCC to issue a public notice on February 6th, clarifying that fines imposed on those subject to the robocall rules for not keeping contact information up to date do not apply to licensees such as radio amateurs, but that the 10-day deadline does apply to all FRN holders.
The Federal Communications Commission is looking for qualified applicants for field agents in 7 Enforcement Bureau offices across the United States, including Atlanta, Georgia, Boston, Massachusetts, Chicago, Illinois, Dallas, Texas, New Orleans, Louisiana, New York, New York, and Portland, Oregon. Incumbents will resolve radio frequency interference, educate users, and enforce regulations. The GS levels for this position have been expanded to GS7, opening the opportunity for new college graduates. 1 year of work experience is not required for this position. Closing date is March 2nd, 2026. Field agents will perform and direct field work in matters of importance to communications involving safety of life and property. They will serve as a point of contact for FCC licensees, including the U.S. government, in matters of fixed and mobile radio direction finding and interference resolution. In addition, they will participate in unique enforcement and engineering projects that have regional or national applications. Successful candidates will operate and understand all technical equipment typically used in the field, including RF spectrum analyzers, field strength meters, RF field survey meters, and radio receivers. They will maintain contact with and assist other federal agencies, foreign counterparts, and local law enforcement organizations concerning interaction and utilization of the radio spectrum for both authorized and unauthorized activities. Responsibilities include initiating official notices of violation, warnings, notices of apparent liability for forfeiture, and other orders to radio operators and licensees to bring unsatisfactory or violative conditions to their attention as a result of monitoring, investigations, and inspections. They will independently initiate correspondence or other communications with complainants and radio users concerning the enforcement functions of the office and region. Other responsibilities include participating in regional emergency planning meetings, serving as the local expert in emergency communications restoration, participating in Federal Emergency Management Administration conducted training exercises, and serving on the ESF-2 task force and deployments as necessary. Finally, successful candidates will participate and assist in the planning of Bureau enforcement and compliance workshops for persons associated with the various industries and radio services the Commission regulates. The salary range is $57,736 to $158,322 per year, depending upon the qualifications and experience.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
The National Conference of Volunteer Examiner Coordinators, or NCVEC, Question Pool Committee has released a February 19, 2026 revision to the new 2026 through 2030 Technician Class Question Pool. Questions drawn from that pool are valid for exams given on or after July 1, 2026. The revision includes minor wording clarifications to 4 questions in the pool. The revised questions are T1C01, T5A05, T7A09, and T0A10. These updated questions have been incorporated into the published Technician Question Pool documents and are available on the NCVEC website. The 2026 through 2030 Technician Question Pool will be in effect from July 1st, 2026 through June 30th, 2030. The current technician pool is only valid through June 30th, 2026. The ARRL Volunteer Examiner Coordinator advises the amateur radio community to regularly check the NCVEC website at www.ncvec.org for updates to the question pools, which may include errata and withdrawn questions.
It's the year of the club, and the second annual ARRL Ham Radio Open House event in April offers a chance to show off your club's high-tech gear and skills to your community. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here to tell us all the details in this special report from League headquarters.
ARRL is encouraging radio clubs and schools to help promote amateur radio science and technology by opening your stations to the public with an open house during the month of April. In addition, groups are encouraged to set up in public places or conduct outdoor activities such as a Parks on the Air POTA activation or satellite contact. The event is built around World Amateur Radio Day, Saturday, April 18th, but your open house may be scheduled at any point in the month. Ham Radio Open House is intended to highlight the amateur radio service for its development and practice of the latest radio communications and technology, and as a hands-on pathway into science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM fields, for the next generation. This is a chance to not only shape the conversation about modern ham radio, but also to show how it serves as a stepping stone and test bed for many young people pursuing STEM education and future high-tech careers. As ARRL CEO David Minster, NA2AA, writes in his March QST editorial, the notions of ham sitting in Grandpa's basement listening to tube radios is quickly dispelled when visitors see a modern transceiver and computer being used to work the world. World Amateur Radio Day, held on April 18th this year, is celebrated worldwide by radio amateurs and their national associations, which are organized as member societies of the International Amateur Radio Union, IARU. It was on this day in 1925 that IARU was formed in Paris. American Radio Relay League, ARRL co-founder Hiram Percy Maxim was its first president. The first Ham Radio Open House event last year was tied to IARU's centennial celebrations. This year's activity is part of ARRL's Year of the Club theme. Look for resources to help organize and promote the event soon, including an interactive Ham Radio Open House locator. All details are at arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Clubs are encouraged to showcase the latest digital modes, such as FT8 using WSJTX or other digital modes. This could be a great opportunity to explore new areas of amateur radio and demonstrate how the service is at the cutting edge of electrical engineering. Imagine your open house visitors seeing a software-defined radio waterfall display and then hearing what the signal they see on the screen sounds like and seeing the message it contains. Here are just a few ways to participate in and promote World Amateur Radio Day. Get a station on the air. Create your own personal event to talk about amateur radio to others, including family and friends. Create and hold a special net or on-air event on World Amateur Radio Day to raise the level of attention for the celebration and to encourage other hams to talk about our hobby. Consider creating and offering a commemorative certificate for contacting your special activation. It can be an electronic one, as these are cost-effective. Get the word out. If you are an ARRL Public Information Coordinator, Public Information Officer, or responsible for radio club publicity, send a press release and conduct some public relations outreach to highlight the day and/or events. Talk about all the activities radio amateurs have continued to support during the pandemic and how amateur radio service serves our communities. Promote your personal World Amateur Radio Day activities on social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook by using the hashtag World Amateur Radio Day. Make sure to send it to various clubs, reflectors, and local media. Once again, you can look for resources to help organize and promote the event soon, including an interactive ham radio open house locator. Find details at www.arrl.org.
A recently released HT may be the best full duplex HT available for FM satellite operations since the discontinuation of the Kenwood THD72, the Anytone AT-D90UV, which is also available as the Bridgecom Maverick and the BTEC DA-X72. The Anytone AT-D8090UV is a dual-band VHF, UHF DMR digital, and analog handheld radio with built-in Bluetooth, GPS, and APRS capability. Features include airband AM receive, crossband repeater mode, and an analog scrambler and compander. It has a 1.75-inch color IFT display, allowing easy access to 4,000 channels and up to 500,000 digital contacts. The radio is powered by a 3,100 milliamp-hour battery with convenient USB-C charging and upgraded 2G memory capacity. Next-generation digital narrowband functionality has also been promised as a future firmware update. A version of the firmware with NXDN support is currently available through unofficial sources. The AT-D890UV also has full satellite Doppler tracking capability that has been present in previous Anytone radios, but unfortunately this feature does not currently work in full duplex mode. There is a YouTube video with W8CPT which demonstrates its full duplex capability on SO50, showing no apparent dents while operating in the VU mode. The Anytone AT-D890UV is available from most amateur radio retailers for around $300. As of this writing, DX Engineering expects to ship orders on February 23rd, while Ham Radio Outlet has a limited stock at their Anaheim location.
Amateur radio operators in New Hampshire are eagerly awaiting the passage of a measure by their state lawmakers to create a new vanity license plate type for motor vehicles that clearly identifies the owner of the vehicle to be an amateur radio operator. A public hearing was held last month on the House bill, which would authorize the creation of vanity license plates and decals that identify amateur radio operators by their Federal Communications Commission call sign. If the owner chooses not to display their call sign, they may use a standard issue plate featuring a lightning bolt symbol to indicate their status as a licensed amateur radio operator. If lawmakers approve the bill, it would still need the signature of Governor Kelly Ayotte before becoming law. Governor Ayotte has shown support of ham radio, proclaiming June of last year Amateur Radio Month in recognition of radio operators' important roles in public service and emergency communications.
The Federal Communications Commission in October 2025 adopted a report and order to delete almost 400 obsolete rules pertaining to its wireless services. As previously reported by ARRL, among the deletions were 4 in Part 97 that govern the amateur radio service. ARRL reports that the notice of the report and order has now been published in the Federal Register. The following 4 Part 97 provisions are now deleted as of February 10, 2026. Part 97.27. This provision is duplicative of a statutory provision related to the FCC's right to modify station licenses. Part 97.29. This provision specified an obsolete procedure to replace paper licenses. ARRL proposed deleting this section in comments filed earlier this year. Part 97.315, Subpart B, Paragraph 2. This obsolete provision grandfathered HF amplifiers purchased before April 28, 1978, by an amateur radio operator for use at that operator's station, and grandfathered those manufactured before April 28, 1978, for which a marketing waiver was issued. Part 97.521, Subpart B in Appendix 2. This rule and appendix relate to obsolete VEC regions.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio. ARRL announced the winner of the 2025 ARRL Sweepstakes ICOM Dream Station on Saturday, February 14th at the 2026 Orlando HamCation. The announcement was made by ARRL President Rick Roderick, K5UR, with ICOM America Senior Sales Manager Ray Novak, N9JA. The ARRL Sweepstakes ran from January 3rd to December 31st, 2025 as the centerpiece of a year-long membership drive designed to encourage new members to join and current members to renew their support. Roderick announced that the ARRL Sweepstakes winner is member Lee Warren, KI5YDR, of Honolulu, Hawaii. Warren earned his amateur radio license in 2022 after thinking about the value of having radios available in case of a disaster. With all the research I was doing, he says, I realized I might as well get my technician license. He upgraded to general class in 2023 so he could operate KH-6BB, the radio room aboard the USS Missouri Museum ship in Pearl Harbor. His first contact was with a Parks on the Air operator at Lake Mead, Nevada. Now he's learning Morse code so he can operate using the keys once used by his grandfather, Thomas Lee Buddy Dykes, who became a silent key in 2000. Roderick and Novak congratulated Warren via Zoom from the convention floor. He said, I'm very excited about winning the sweepstakes, especially since I was going to renew my ARRL membership anyway. The publications and public outreach are great, but the real value for me is knowing that an organized motivation group of people are lobbying Congress to make sure we keep the airwaves free enough for the hobby to thrive. I also appreciate ICOM's donation of the prize to help keep ARRL top of the mind for my fellow hams and future licensees. Warren received the grand prize Dream Station featuring the latest amateur radio equipment generously donated by ICOM America. He won an IC 7760 HF and 50 MHz 200-watt transceiver, an ICOM 60th Anniversary Signature Edition, which also includes a limited edition Seiko watch commemorating ICOM's anniversary. Also with the station was an ICOM IC PW2 1kW linear amplifier and an ICOM SM50 advanced desktop microphone. In recognition of the extraordinary support behind the 2025 membership drive, The ARRL Board of Directors formally honored ICOM America Incorporated and Ray Novak and 9JA. The board also expressed its sincere gratitude for ICOM's donation of the complete amateur radio station and acknowledged Novak's instrumental role in making the contribution possible. The board at the ARRL also noted ICOM's ongoing partnership to strengthen ARRL's mission and help ensure a vibrant future for amateur radio.
The Radio Society of Great Britain 2026 band plans were published in the recently released February 2026 edition of RADCOM and are now also available at rsgb.org/bandplans. This year's changes in the United Kingdom address a handful of key topics, including updates to the 5 MHz band plan to emphasize correct operating, which comes in the light of out-of-band FT8 usage and Ofcom monitoring concerns. Updates at 50 MHz have been made to accommodate new repeater inputs, which use a wider 1 MHz split, easing the implementation of their duplex filters. In the 430 MHz UHF band, provisions for low power and ad hoc repeaters and some editorial updates have also been made.
While most of the contiguous United States were experiencing severe winter weather over the past 2 weeks, Honolulu, Hawaii had a different kind of severe weather, and amateur radio was ready. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with more.
On February 8th and 9th, 2026, severe weather brought high winds, heavy rainfall, flash flooding, power outages, and hazardous surf conditions across Honolulu and the state of Hawaii. The National Weather Service predicted that heavy rains, flash flooding, and damaging winds would affect all islands. Officials warned of possible flooding, hazardous travel, and power outages. Amateur radio operators were activated inside the Emergency Operations Center to support the Department of Emergency Management, City and County of Honolulu. Volunteer communicators operated, reported in, and stood ready to provide backup communication should cellular or internet systems fail. That storm hit with 70-mile-an-hour winds, knocked down trees, and dumped 30 inches of rain and mountain snow. Radio traffic remained light, though, as outages were quickly addressed through coordinated efforts between city and state agencies and utility partners. Shelters and volunteers remained ready in case conditions worsened. This wasn't a drill, and amateur radio operators were prepared to move quickly and efficiently. It was encouraging to work alongside such engaged and supportive leadership from the Department of Management, said Deputy RACI's Program Coordinator Michael Miller, KH6ML. Their awareness of our role in a larger gray or black sky event ensures that Amateur Radio Civil Emergency Service, RACI's, remains fully integrated into emergency operations. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Both Governor Josh Green and Honolulu Mayor Rick Blangiardi issued emergency proclamations to mobilize resources and protect public safety. Volunteer communicators joined statewide HF nets at 9 a.m., 12 noon, and 4 p.m. on 7.090 MHz lower sideband and updated and posted the ICS 205 communication plan on hawaiiares.net for download and offline reference. Mark Kaku, KH6LT, coordinated amateur radio operations inside the Emergency Operations Center. Our goal is simple: be ready before we're needed. We focus on coverage, documentation, and coordination so that if primary systems fail, we can immediately step in.
The Worldwide Radio Operators Foundation, Incorporated, announced that it has assumed responsibility for WRTC.info, the long-standing community website dedicated to preserving the history of the World Radio Sport Team Championship, or WRTC. WRTC is an on-site ham radio competition held every 2 to 6 years. Previous WRTCs have been held in Seattle in 1990, San Francisco in 1996, Slovenia in 2000, Finland in 2002, Brazil in 2006, Russia in 2010, Boston in 2014, Germany in 2018, and Italy in 2023. The next competition will take place this July in the United Kingdom. WRTC event information is in many places on the Internet, and the website is dedicated to collecting information from all WRTC events. This site matters, said Doug Grant, Kilo 1 Delta Golf, Worldwide Radio Operators Foundation Vice Chair and Secretary of the WRTC Sanctioning Committee. WRTC.info has become the most complete public record of WRTC, how the events were run, who participated, and how the competition has evolved. Ensuring that history is preserved accurately and responsibly is important to the entire radio sport community, and the Worldwide Radio Operators Foundation is pleased to help provide continuity for that work.
The ARRL's new book, Digital Networking for Ham Radio, a practical hands-on guide to designing and implementing high-speed data networks for amateur radio stations, is now available. Written by Glenn Popeil, KW5GP, the book brings together in one comprehensive resource the knowledge needed to build, configure, and expand digital networks for ham radio. From TCP/IP fundamentals to deploying mesh technologies such as Arden, HamWAN, and Meshtastic, readers will find clear explanations and step-by-step guidance. When I began experimenting with amateur radio data networking, I realized there wasn't a single resource that clearly explained how it all worked, especially TCP/IP, in terms of the average ham who could relate to it, said Popeil. That inspired me to create a practical guide to designing and implementing high-speed amateur radio networks. Since there's no speed limit above 70 centimeters, operators can integrate webcams, IP phones, and other network devices. I hope this book encourages hams to explore, experiment, and enjoy networking on the microwave bands. Digital networking for ham radio covers selecting hardware, choosing network topologies, configuring systems, and staying compliant with FCC Part 97 rules. The book is designed for both newcomers and experienced operators who want to expand their stations with resilient, high-speed networking capabilities.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. I would like to open this week with a paragraph from the ARRL Annual Board of Directors meeting, which was held January 16th and 17th. Quote, Director Norris removed the DX Advisory Committee report and communicated to the board the latest developments from the DXCC committee. He emphasized that the committee has been exceptionally active, more so than he has observed in the past. They are currently reevaluating some of the rules governing DXCC and reviewing the criteria associated with those rules. Another key focus is a recommendation from the committee regarding the digitization program. President Roderick took the opportunity to remind Director Norris that even small changes can have a significant impact. Director Norris acknowledged the hard work everyone on the committee has done. President Roderick then expressed his gratitude to Director Norris for his comments, end quote. If you are a participant in the ARRL DXCC program, you should know who your section representative is on the DXAC and what they're working on. Just drop them a note and ask them. You certainly can give them a call as well. Their information is listed on the ARRL.org webpage. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com and I'll fix you up. So first we have an update on the CY0S Sable Island DXpedition. February 11th was a milestone day for the CY0S DXpedition team. Glenn, W0GJ, traveled to meet up with Craig at K9CT to run a full test of the new Flex Aurora radios along with 6 new laptops. All 6 500-watt Flex radios were tested in all modes, CW, sideband, FT8, and RTTY. Glenn reports that there was a full test of the radios, laptops, and networking as well, and it was all very successful with no issues found. Radio number 6 is set up for both HF, FT8 Foxhound, and 6 meters non-Foxhound simultaneously. At CY0S, the team will be operating Super Fox mode on FT8 on all bands, but on 60 meters, regular FT8 will be used. As to 6 meters, Lee, WW2DX, ran tests yesterday as well, and he was very encouraged by the results. And this was submitted by the team leader, Murray, WA4DAN. I also have an update on Deschisheo Island, which is KP5-NP3VI. Deschisheo De-Expedition 2026 update, quote, the team has exceeded 80,000 QSOs. They are maintaining their ongoing all-time new one focus and continuing to adjust their operating schedule to balance battery life and propagation. The countdown to QRT is underway, with the final date being March 3rd, 2026. As mentioned, KP5-NP3VI has now exceeded 80,000 QSOs, all generated using our fully solar-powered, unattended, remote deployment unit operating from Deschisheo Island. Current statistics show 80,450 QSOs in the log and 16,772 unique call signs also in the log, with 147 DXCC entities worked to date. This milestone continues to demonstrate the success of this first ever approach to activating a rare DXCC entity entirely through renewable energy and remote operation, with no personnel stationed on the island. The operation continues to deliver significant log impact, including thousands of new DXCCs, band slots, and mode slots for operators worldwide. As we enter the final phase of the operation, we remain focused on providing opportunities for stations that still need KP5 for an all-time new one. We respectfully encourage those who already have KP5 confirmed to operate in the spirit of sharing this rare entity by allowing room for stations still seeking it. The cooperation of the DX community has been essential in maximizing new contacts. To further support this effort, we have added an extra hour of FT8 operation specifically looking for all-time new ones in Europe. This additional window is intended to take advantage of propagation opportunities and give more stations a chance to log KP5 before they go QRT. Operating schedules continue to be carefully balanced around solar energy, availability, battery, reserves, and propagation paths to Europe, Asia, and other regions, while maintaining reliable continuous service. All activity remains constrained by the realities of operating a station powered entirely by solar energy without generators or amplifiers. KP5-NP3VI is scheduled to go QRT on March 3rd. With limited operating days remaining, we encourage stations still needing Deschisheo Island to monitor spots and propagation closely for remaining opportunities. If you would like more details, check out the DX Mentor YouTube and podcast episodes from 2 weeks ago to learn more about the team lead and the Deschisheo DX petition. We have a couple updates from Africa. The first is Uganda, which is 5 X-ray. Richard, HB9FHV, is currently in Uganda for a brief visit with basic radio equipment until February 28th. He plans limited activity as 5 X-ray 4 Tango Alpha almost daily on 10, 15, and 20 meters between 1500 Zulu and 1600 Zulu. From Mali, Tango Zulu, we have this. Omar, DK1CE, should be QRV as TZ1CE until March 1st, and I've heard him. He will be doing mostly FT8 and sideband and says when he's on FT8, he gives stations outside of Europe precedent at all times. He plans special attention to 160-meter FT8, 80 meters FT8, and 6 meters, and will update daily on Club Log and LOTW. And you can reach the Mali 60-meter operation is not allowed, so you can't reach him on 60. That's what I was about to say. From the Caribbean, we have a couple. We have an update from Mali, which is Tango Zulu. Omar, DK1CE, should be QRV as Tango Zulu 1 Charlie Echo until March 1st. He will be doing mostly FT8 and sideband and says when he's on FT8, he, quote, gives stations outside Europe precedent at all times, end quote. He plans special attentions to 160-meter FT8, 80-meter FT8, and 6 meters and will update daily on Club Log. The LOTW log will be updated after the operation. And by the way, in Mali, there is no 60-meter operation. And now we have Fox Juliet, St. Bartholomew in the Caribbean. On February 12th, Andreas, Delta Kilo 6 Alpha Sierra, began his February and March 2026 Fox Juliet stroke Delta Kilo 6 Alpha Sierra operation from St. Bart's. He will be QRV on CW, FT4, and FT8 on 3.5 through 50 megahertz, including participation in the ARL International DX CW contest. And you can QSL the FJ operation to DK6AS, either direct or via the Bureau. So another Caribbean entity we have is Turks and Caicos, which is Victor Papa 5. The Russell family, which is WD5JR, N5VOF, and KJ5CMP, are in the Turks and Caicos Islands until February 23rd. They have an IC 7300 and a second rig running 5 to 100 watts into a 17-foot whip with a coil and an end-fed half wave. They are active as VP5 stroke home call on 7 through 6 meters, 40 through 6 meters, on sideband and CW. They're uploading videos to their YouTube channel, which is Radio Roamers, and their Facebook page, which is also Radio Roamers. QSL via home calls with an SASE. Now, this is one I heard last night, and I had to really make sure that I was getting it right. Ethiopia, Echo Tango. Ken, K4ZW, is going back there for a week, February 25th to March 2nd, and says he should be able to find some time to get on the air as ET3 Alpha Alpha from the club station, depending on his work schedule. Well, Ken's not going to be there till February 25th, but there was someone on the air the last couple of days, so you may want to give ET3AA a listen. And now another African, Guinea-Bissau. The J51A DXpedition team headed for the Balagos Archipelago in the February-March timeframe gives the following update. Quote, J51 Alpha on QO100. Quote, we were never asked to be active on QO100 satellite. We learned that J5 has never been active on QO100 before, so we decided to give it a try for a lot of all-time new contacts on sideband, CW, and FT8. However, none of us had operated over satellite before, so please bear with us if we do something stupid or unexpected. Let us know by email, which is j51alpha or j51a at gmx.de, and we'll fix any misbehavior ASAP. Technically, we will be using a 6 meter as the IF band. It means that we cannot do 6 meters when on QO100 and vice versa. QO100 operation will start a couple of days after the other bands. Please watch the news section on the QRZ.com J51A page for more info. From Greenland, which is Oscar X-Ray, we have this. From February 17th to March 9th, Bo OZ1 Delta Juliet Juliet will be active as Oscar X-Ray 3 Lima X-Ray from Assat City Island during this period. Please note this is not a DXpedition, but rather a business trip, so activity may be limited. But if you can get Greenland, it's always cool to do so. And then we have the Maldives, 8 Quebec. Alex, Oscar Echo 5 Alpha Uniform Hotel, is planning a holiday operation as 8 Quebec 7 Alpha Hotel from Razabo Atoll, March 1st through the 10th. So keep an eye out for that if you need the Maldives. And finally, here's a future one from Franz Joseph Land, which is RI1JFJL. And this is becoming rarer. The Russian DX team is preparing a major DXpedition to Franz Joseph Land, the Arctic Ocean archipelago, ranked 44th globally and 26th in North America. The operation will feature at least 5 high-power radio stations running continuously on all HF bands for 15 days in September of 2026, aiming to contact as many stations as possible, including those in distant areas. The total budget for this trip is close to $80,000, making it their most expensive expedition yet. And financial support from the DX clubs and individuals is crucial for its success. If you'd like to make a donation, and I encourage you to do so, please contact me, the dxmentor@gmail.com, and I will send those instructions along. In addition to the previously mentioned KP5/NP3VI interview, the DX Mentor podcast will drop this weekend with an interview with Hal, W88C. Hal will be discussing the 9 Uniform 1 radio uniform DXpedition that logged almost 180,000 QSOs. Give it a listen and let me know what you think. Until next week, this is Bill, AJ8B, saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups. Have a great DX week.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, your amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air, available as a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartMedia, and Spotify.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. just under a year ago, I started an experiment. I set up a beacon for WSPR, or Weak Signal Propagation Reporter, transmitting at 200 milliwatts into a dummy load, using 8 bands between 80 meters and 10 meters. I also set up an RTL SDR dongle connected to an external 20-meter HF antenna, and made it monitor 18 amateur bands between 630 meters and 23 centimeters. I left this running 24/7 for most of the year, though there were times when I detached the antenna due to local thunderstorms, and there was a 7-week period where there were no reports. It's highly likely that I forgot to reconnect the antenna, but I don't recall. For this analysis, I used the online whispernet.org database, where I uploaded my spots as they were decoded. I noticed that there are reports that I have locally that are not in the database, though I'm not sure why. They're incomplete and not in the same format, and merging these is non-trivial for reasons I'll discuss. Lesson learnt. The RTL SDR WhisperD tool needs to be patched to output the data in the same format as is available from the online database, and I need to actively log locally. The results are puzzling, at least to me right now. Let's start with the low-hanging fruit. There are no reports of my whisper beacon being received by anyone other than me. That doesn't guarantee that nobody heard me, just that nobody reported that they did. In the database, there's just over 6,000 reports of my station receiving a whisper transmission from my beacon during the past year. The reports cover all bands, though not equally. The 80-meter band represents 6% of reports, where 40 meters accounts for 20%. The reported SNR, or signal-to-noise ratio, varies significantly across the data. For example, the 12-meter band shows a range of 42 dB. Digging into this does not reveal any patterns related to date, time of day, season, other band reports, or any other metric I was able to imagine. In my exploration, missing records and time zone differences aside, I discovered that the local data does not appear to match the database. For example, I have records where the software decoded my beacon 10 times in the same time slot, but none of them exist in the database. For others, there's only one matching record, which leads me to believe that the whispernet.org database only accepts the first report for any given combination of timestamp, transmitter, and receiver, but I have yet to confirm that. So let's talk about getting more than one result for a specific time slot. As you might know, a whisper signal is transmitted every 120 seconds, starting at the even minute. Each transmission lasts 110.6 seconds. The decoder will make several attempts to decode multiple, potentially overlapping signals. It is my understanding that the way this happens is by essentially removing a known decoded signal and then attempting to decode what's left, repeating until either there's no more signals to decode or time runs out, since there's probably only really 9.4 seconds in which to do this. Potentially this means that a faster computer will decode more signals, but I've not actually tested that, but it's probably something worth pursuing. Back to our decodes. If the first decode is removed from the received data and the next decode gives you similar information, same call sign and maidenhead locator with SNR and frequency differences, then you might imagine that there's so much of it there that the only way that might happen is because the receiver is overloaded. I'm still looking into this because if that's the case, then we'd need to determine if the receiver was always overloaded or only sometimes. It's curious since there's over 1,000 other signals being received from other stations, several over 18,000 kilometers away, so it's not like the receiver is completely swamped. Another hypothesis is that the decode is coming from a different band, like a harmonic. This is potentially caused because, from a band and timing perspective, the receiver isn't linked to the transmitter in any way. the transmitter hammers away 24/7 one band after the next, switching every 2 minutes. The receiver listens for half an hour on a band, then randomly picks the next until it runs out of bands and starts again. The receiver is listening on more than twice as many bands as the transmitter operates on, but that doesn't mean that it cannot hear the transmitter on a harmonic of one of the bands. Again, I don't know if this is the case or if something else is happening. One thing I'd expect is to see reports on other harmonics outside the bands that the transmitter is using, but I'm not seeing that. Perhaps the overload is limited to just the band we're actively monitoring, and the other signals are coming in regardless of the overload. I'm still trying to determine if that's the case. As I said, merging the data from the two sources is non-trivial. Time zones and formatting are not the same, and I'm not in the mood for manually fixing 2,500 or so records, not to mention attempting to determine which SNR is real for the multi-decodes. So, what did I learn? For starters, the world didn't come to a sudden and laborious stop when I transmitted into a dummy load. The experiment was interesting and worth doing. I should test using shorter runs until I've determined the mechanisms involved. For example, one amateur suggested that I might be decoding information that's coming in via the coax, rather than from an antenna. That said, doing so would also require significantly more effort to incrementally analyze this data, so I'd have to find ways to improve my workflow. The SNR is all over the place, not something that I expected. All bands are represented in the data. There does not seem to be any relationship between date, time, other stations and the signal strength seen from the local transmission. I need better record keeping. No doubt there's more. If you have questions, feel free to comment. The experiment also leaves plenty of questions. Why do the SNR values vary so much? I can't imagine that the variation relates to propagation, since we'd have reports from other receivers. So, is it something else? Even though we're talking about equipment that's indoors, are we observing variations in electronics temperatures, for example? Alternatively, if the measurements represent overload of the receiver, why don't we see other harmonics, and how is it possible that we can receive and decode very weak signals from other stations? If the signal is arriving via an unexpected path, like the coax, rather than the antenna, what could we do to stop that from occurring? And what effects does it have on our current dataset? And could we account for those effects? I suppose leaving the ultimate question for last, is the data that I've collected over the past year useful, beyond potentially, this is not how you do this, or is it essentially meaningless? I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
People in or near central Texas who rely on global positioning systems, or GPS, received a warning from the U.S. military base at Fort Hood that wide-ranging GPS tests there might cause interference with their own personal device. Farmers, pilots, smartphone users, and anyone else who relies on GPS to get from here to there have been paying close attention to the alert from the U.S. military base at Fort Hood. The announcement said that throughout February, the region including Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and even Oklahoma City could experience interference and disruptions. The final rounds of testing are to be held February 13 and 14 from 3 to 5 a.m. local time, and resuming nightly from February 15th through the 22nd. The final testing period is February 23rd through the 27th.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. AMSAT Spain will have a new satellite launch around June on the SpaceX Transporter 17 mission. This new satellite is UNNE-1B and is a pocket cube, as SO-124 has already re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and SO-125 will shortly. This will replace them with an FM repeater and FSK telemetry up to 1600 BPS, which is customizable by the command stations. There will also be a CW beacon. This satellite will have an educational experiment. Within the telemetry, there will be clues. Every week, a new clue will be transmitted. The goal is to collect all the clues and solve the mystery. Further details will be on the AMSAT-EA.org website. AMSAT Youth Initiative has its own website, buzzsat.com. That's BUZZSAT.com. And we have loaded a coloring book about satellites. This is a great way to learn about satellites while coloring each page. The coloring book is completely free. If you or a child enjoys this and would like to become an AMSAT member, membership for students is free of charge at AMSAT.org. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for a look at this week's solar weather and the terrestrial propagation forecast. Solar activity returned to low levels this past week. The strongest event of the period was a C1.8 flare on February 17th from region 4374. This region also was responsible for a C1.4 flare on February 18th. The only other flare of note was a C1.1 flare on February 17th from an unnumbered plage region near S05E85. A plage region is a bright, intensely hot region in the sun's chromosphere, typically found in active areas surrounding sunspots. Region 4374 exhibited minor decays through the dissipation of its trailing spots, and regions 4375 and 77 were largely unchanged in area and complexity. A large filament eruption beyond the southwest limb was seen in SDO and SUVI imagery starting approximately on February 18th. It was also associated with a Type 2 radio sweep that began on February 18th with an estimated shock velocity of 310 kilometers per second. The eruption was first visible in coronagraph imagery on February 18th, but initial analysis indicates no Earth-directed component. Solar activity is forecast to be at low levels with a slight chance for M-class minor to moderate flares through February 20th. Solar wind parameters continued to reflect the waning influence of a positive polarity coronal hole high-speed stream. Solar wind stream followed a general declining trend, decreasing from an initial peak near 600 kilometers per second and dropped to approximately 500 kilometers per second by the end of the reporting period. The solar wind environment is expected to remain enhanced through February 20th due to continued but weakening coronal hole high-speed stream influences. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Carl Wetzel-Swab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the Voice of America CAP online for Ham Radio website.
Just ahead in radio sport this week, February 19th and 20th, it's the Walk for the Bacon QRP contest. That is CW. February 21st and 22nd, the ARRL International DX contest, CW as well. February 21st to the 22nd, the REF contest, single sideband and phone. February 21st to the 22nd, the South Carolina QSO Party, CW phone and digital. And on February 21st, the Feldheld Sprint, that is digital. Remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions, February 20th through the 21st, the Greater Houston Ham Fest, hosting the ARRL Texas State Convention. That's in Rosenberg, Texas. February 27th and 28th, the ARRL Southwestern Division Convention in Yuma, Arizona. And February 28th, HamCon, ARRL Vermont State Convention. That's in Colchester, Vermont. And on March 6th and 7th, the Birmingham Fest, hosting the ARRL Alabama Section Convention. That's in Trussville, Alabama. And remember to search the ARRL Hamfest and Convention database to find more events in your area.
Fuji Oscar 29, or JAS-2, will soon enter a season of orbits in full sunlight, making it once again available for worldwide use. JAS-2 was successfully launched on August 17 of 1996. It orbits the Earth in a polar orbit at 1,300 kilometers in altitude in a time of 112 minutes. The inclination is 98 degrees. The transmission power of the beacon is 100 milliwatts. The transponder is 1 watt. The linear transponder downlink is from 435.800 MHz through 435.900 MHz upper sideband and CW, with an uplink of 145.900 MHz through 146.00 MHz lower sideband and CW. The CW beacon frequency is 435.795 MHz. Designated as Fuji Oscar 29 after achieving orbit, JAS-2 has long been one of the most popular and most useful linear satellites available to radio amateurs. However, as the satellite approaches 30 years of age, its batteries have long since failed. It only continues to operate while the sun is illuminating its solar panel. On March 9, FO-29 will begin orbiting in full sunlight without periodic eclipses. In mid-February, the duration of the shadow decreases from about 20 minutes to about 1 minute a day. Therefore, FO-29's transmitter may suddenly come to life unexpectedly. Amateurs are encouraged to monitor the satellite and to update its activity on the AMSAT Oscar satellite status page. Please enjoy using Fuji Oscar 29 while it remains available.
The Federal Communication Commission said Tuesday it approved Amazon's request to deploy 4,500 satellites, expanding the company's planned constellation as advised to compete with Elon Musk's SpaceX. The FCC approval brings the size of Amazon's planned constellation of low Earth orbit satellites to roughly 7,700 satellites. The company has sent up more than 150 satellites since April, using a variety of rocket launch providers. Amazon has said its goal is to begin providing satellite internet through its service called LEO later this year. The project was announced in 2019. Amazon's next set of satellites are its second generation of the orbital systems, and they will operate at altitudes of up to 400 miles, according to the notice. The additional satellites would add support for more frequency bands and extends LEO's geographic regions. The FCC said Amazon must launch 50% of the approved satellites by February 10, 2032, and the remaining half by February 10, 2035. Amazon is working to meet a separate deadline imposed by the FCC to deploy 1,600 of its first-generation satellites before July 2026. Late last month, the company asked the agency to extend the cutoff to July 2028 or waive the deadline altogether. The FCC hasn't ruled yet on the request. The company blamed delays beyond its control, including a near-term shortage of rockets to lift the satellites into orbit, on its likely inability to meet the deadline. LEO is producing satellites considerably faster than others can launch them, the company wrote. The company has invested $10 billion to stand up its Internet from Space service. LEO is poised to rival SpaceX's Starlink, which has more than 9,000 satellites in orbit and roughly 9 million customers. Amazon expects to spend $1 billion more on its LEO constellation this year as it deploys more satellites, the company said last week in its quarterly report. Amazon Finance Chief Brian Olszewski said the company has more than 20 launches planned in 2026 and more than 30 in 2027. The next LEO mission is set for later this week, when the aeronautics space rocket will fling another 32 satellites into orbit. Amazon has booked 17 other missions with the French company.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
Welcome to the 51st segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio, Ham's organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. With appreciation to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for his permission for us to use his website for these segments, we bring you this next chapter of Ham Radio History. 6 segments sans spark. This is part 2 of this segment. To prepare amateurs to occupy the new bands, QST technical editor Robert S. Cruz wrote about techniques and circuits to get them there. He began by loudly assuring everyone that there is nothing strange about the 20 to 100 meter region. Wavelengths below 20 meters, however, required special stunts due to tube characteristics, and so operation on the 4 to 5 meter band would be treated in a separate article. In any event, the first thing to do was to get a shortwave wave meter. It is absolute nonsense to start sending and receiving at 40 meters unless one knows where 40 meters is. Don't do it. Just for once, break all amateur traditions and make a wave meter first, he pleaded. Recognizing a widespread lack of ability to measure wavelength, Cruz, also a Bureau of Standards engineer, had recently written a 2-part article about wave meters. They were already available commercially from General Radio and the Joule Electrical Instrument Company, and were also not very difficult to build. A homemade wave meter simply consisted of a calibrated tuned circuit and an indicator such as a crystal detector and headphones, light bulb, or galvanometer. One must choose a variable capacitor and inductor that would result in enough space on an adjustment dial to sufficiently resolve individual signals. They must also be built from mechanically well-engineered and constructed parts. A flimsy variable capacitor would easily lose calibration. The quality of the tuning components was far more important than the indicator. The best standard for calibration was the Bureau of Standards station WWV, since other stations' wavelengths were not particularly accurate. You could also set a wave meter to another known calibrated wave meter or send it to a lab for calibration. Calibration of a standard commercially available numerical scale tuning dial could be done by plotting its settings on a graph. Even with a calibrated wave meter, using one to calibrate your equipment was a complicated process in 1924. When using the wave meter with a transmitter, the coupling needed to be very loose, or you'd risk burning out the indicator if it was a bulb. To use a wave meter with a receiver, you would first set the receiver's detector into oscillation. Next, with the wave meter coil very close to the detector's secondary circuit, you tune it until you heard a click in the receiver, indicating that the instrument was loading the receiver's detector circuit and stopping its oscillation. Then you would continue to tune in the same direction until you heard a second click, indicating you'd gone beyond the point where it again oscillated. Now you'd back off the distance to the wave meter in steps until the 2 points converged. That would be the measurement point. The click method would work when receiving a signal too. Cruz warned, however, against calibrating your receiver's tuner, since the markings will not have any meaning unless all the various settings were reset exactly the same way each time, which, he matter-of-factly stated, was impractical in most tuners, and therefore it is the bunk to calibrate a tuner. Keep wavelength handy instead. With a calibrated receiver dial still a distant dream, Cruz's advice was, don't ever try it. He then presented circuits for use in receiving short waves and variations on the Hartley and Colpitts oscillators for transmitting, designs that would be in use for decades to come. Since it was important to control stray capacitance and resistances, Cruz recommended that sockets and tube bases should be removed. They have no business in a 20-meter set. Tubes should be wired in without sockets. 2 years earlier, Cruz and Mason, QST's department editor, had announced the formation of the ARRL Radio Information Service. Its purpose was to answer questions, mostly of a technical nature, submitted by league members. The service was needed, they wrote, because waiting for the next QST took too long, and the average amateur does not want to wait long for his information. He would rather try it and see if anything blows up. The smoke test has a long tradition. Thus, the service endeavored to answer technical questions directly by exchanging letters with members, although the editors admitted that this takes up most of the time of 4 people. They asked members to help them by sending in new information of all sorts as they found it. In this way, the service could act as a central repository. To prime the readership, they presented a list of information actively being sought, including experiences with beverage wires and counterpoises, antenna insulators, transmission as affected by the moon and the barometer, tube comparisons, and information about dead spots you know of, meaning skip zones. The service's rules were simple. Check your back issues of QST before asking something that has already been covered there. Supply a diagram and other full information so that a complete answer could be given, and since all radio men write a terrible paw, use a typewriter. With the accelerating pace of changes and the announcement of new bands, the frontier where no ham had gone before, the information service was beginning to feel overwhelmed. The League reiterated its rules and added a final item. Please remember, Rome was not built in a day. The National Radio Conference had gone on record favoring the elimination of Spark Radio, and the Commerce Department was expected to follow suit. The department would not recall licenses since the 1912 law, which was still in effect, allowed the possession of Spark equipment, and because it seemed unnecessary, since fewer than 1% of ARRL members were still using Spark. Warner did not believe that even 100 of them were left. The department asked for ARRL cooperation, prompting this response. The ARRL here and now calls for the complete and immediate abolition of the amateur Spark. Its day is done. Let it be gone. This is a civilized age, and we have no place for decrement today. The editors of QST have owned and operated Sparks that were their joy and pride. Sparks as good as most of them, and nobody knows better than we the romance and fascination of the old rotary. But its name is mud today, and out it must go, 100%. With that announcement, Spark would shortly disappear from the air forever. We'll continue this segment next week. Included in this material are quotes from the following. R.S. Cruz, working at 20, 40, and 80 meters. QST, September 1924, page 9. S. Cruz, amateur wave meters. QST, February 1924, page 22, and April 1924, page 20. S. Cruz and H.F. Mason, the League's Radio Information Service. QST, August 1923, page 26. Easy on the Questions, QST, September 1924, page 26. Rules Governing the ARRL Information Service, QST, December 1924, page 33. K.B. Warner, Exit the Spark, mislabeled New Problems in a page typesetting error. Editorial, QST, December 1924, page 7. With our thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for the use of his website, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Shortwave radio, so valued as a carrier of critical information at various times in the world's history, has been declining. The BBC, however, has brought back an emergency shortwave radio service to deliver programming to Iran. The turmoil in Iran that led to an information blackout in that nation has prompted the BBC to launch a temporary shortwave radio service for listeners there. Medium and shortwave frequencies have been carrying programs each day starting at 1630 UTC. The content includes news and analysis relevant to Iran and provides a global perspective. In announcing the service, the BBC said this was part of its tradition of providing crisis broadcasting, adding that the broadcast will remain on the air until the end of March. Half-hour programming is broadcast starting at 1630 hours UTC on both 702 kHz and 9465 kHz, and repeated starting at 1800 hours UTC on both 702 kHz and 5935 kHz.
The second largest amateur radio event in the United States took place last weekend, the Orlando HamCation. AMSAT had a robust presence with a booth, amateur satellite demos, and a forum that took place on Saturday morning. At the AMSAT booth, attendees were able to purchase AMSAT items, join or renew their memberships, and see the AMSAT CubeSat simulator in action. AMSAT President Drew Glassbrenner, KO4MA, along with his son Karsten, KQ4SJM, conducted amateur satellite demonstrations throughout the weekend. At the AMSAT forum on Saturday morning, Glassbrenner began with an overview of the amateur satellites that are currently workable, including FM repeaters, linear transponders, digipeaters, and satellites providing SSTV and SSDV image downlinks. Glassbrenner then described AMSAT's educational projects, including the AMSAT CubeSat simulator and the AMSAT Youth Initiative's free online courses at buzzsat.com. He also discussed AMSAT's new free satellite coloring book, available for download at buzzsat.com. After discussing AMSAT's educational projects, Glassbrenner moved to detailing the current status of AMSAT's satellite projects. First, AMSAT's Golf Tee satellite is expected to be completed this year. This is an advanced 3U CubeSat with deployable solar panels, attitude control, a VU transponder, X-band high-speed downlink, and a radiation-tolerant internal housekeeping unit. While there is still a possibility of a launch through NASA's CubeSat launch initiative, AMSAT is also investigating possible commercial launch opportunities. The first AMSAT Fox Plus satellite is also expected to be completed this year. Fox Plus is an updated 1U CubeSat series. The first two are based on ISIS-spaced hardware with AMSAT radios, the AMSAT LTM-1 and PACSAT. AMSAT is exploring commercial launch opportunities for these spacecraft. AMSAT's LTM-1 is a 30 kHz wide VU linear transponder providing a 1200 BPS BPSK telemetry downlink and a command receiver. Previous versions have flown on HO-107, AO-109, and MO-122. These modules are expected to be provided to universities for use in their CubeSat projects in return for open transponder access, and production is currently expanding. AMSAT's PACSAT is a VU digital payload designed for multi-user access with 4 uplink receivers and 1 downlink transmitter. This is a hosted payload expected to be provided to universities for use in their CubeSat projects in return for open access. The first batch of these payloads is in production right now. AMSAT's SDR Gen 2 is a versatile GNU radio-based SDR transceiver, providing continuous coverage from 144 MHz to 6 GHz, along with upconversion to provide a 10 GHz downlink. This transceiver is capable of providing any type of transponder within those frequency ranges and a minimum downlink data rate of 1 megabits per second. This transceiver is being built to fly on future Fox Plus and Golf missions. Glassbrenner also discussed the European Space Agency Future GEO project. This is a proposal for a geostationary satellite to serve ESA members and associate members. The planned location of this satellite in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean will cover most of North America. Initial proposals were submitted last year, and AMSAT participated in a planning meeting led by AMSAT-DL last fall. The project has not yet been funded, but AMSAT will continue to participate in this effort.
You have probably heard about POTA, Parks on the Air, and SOTA, Summits on the Air. Well, now there's BOTA, Bunkers on the Air. Officially known as WWBOTA, Worldwide Bunkers on the Air, it is an amateur radio activity open to amateur radio operators and shortwave listeners everywhere. Similar to its counterparts, radio amateurs activate historic bunker locations around the world with portable and mobile operations. Bunkers are fortified shelters, usually underground, used for protection against attacks and for storage of military goods. Hunters and chasers can have QSOs with those activating stations and can collect special bunker reference numbers. Awards for activating and hunting bunkers are available, but you can get involved by just making a QSO or shortwave listening. There are 20 member countries in the BOTA program so far, with 2 new countries added in February as membership continues to grow. The U.S. BOTA joined WWBOTA on January 7, 2026. Most bunker operations center on 40 and 20 meter single sideband, but other bands are increasingly popular, including the higher HF bands, VHF, and above. CW, FT8, and other modes are also popular, including FT4, RTTY, PSK, and SSTV. CQ Bunkers on the Air is the official calling signal, and the US BOTA offers 3 awards: Activator, Lifetime Award, Activator's Lifetime Bunker-to-Bunker Award on all bands, and Activator Annual Reference Award. There will be US BOTA National Awards coming in March 2026. A lot of history is involved with BOTA activations from inside, outside, and nearby. For more information, visit Worldwide Bunkers on the Air.
The latest de-expedition to Bouvet Island, 3Y0K, is back on track after a 2-week delay for mechanical repairs to its ship, the Argus. Team manager James Gallo, KB2FMH, confirmed reports from earlier in the week that the ship had arrived in Cape Town, South Africa, and was being loaded with the expedition's equipment. The team of 24 operators includes 22-year-old Max Friedman, N4ML, an ARRL staff member. In an earlier statement on the 3Y0K website, the team leadership explained that our vessel requires additional maintenance to ensure it's fully prepared for the demanding voyage to one of the most remote and challenging locations on Earth. The announcement added that, while this delay is disappointing, the safety of our team remains a high priority. The adjustment does not change the overall strategy of the de-expedition, which has been carefully planned over the past 3 years. Gallo says the ship will head out soon, and the arrival time will be weather-dependent. Updates will be posted on the expedition website, which is www.3y0k.com.
As amateur radio experiences a post-pandemic surge in new licenses, a troubling trend has emerged. Online communities have become battlegrounds where real radio debates and equipment tribalism drive newcomers away from a hobby designed around experimentation and connection. Ham Radio Gizmos is tackling this challenge head-on with an innovative solution, a comedy podcast that makes learning fun again. The show centers on twin brothers Guy and Gus Wire, whose constant disagreements mirror the hobby's most heated debates. Guy champions modern software-defined radios, digital modes, and computer integration. Gus lives for vintage tube equipment, heavy iron, and radios that glow before they transmit. Their sibling rivalry becomes the vehicle for education, proving both approaches have merit, while reminding listeners that ham radio is big enough for everyone. Somewhere between firmware updates and heated forum arguments, we forgot that this hobby is supposed to be enjoyable, says Lee Love, N2LEE, creator of Ham Radio Gizmos. Guy and Gus exist to prove you can laugh at ourselves while learning that real radio is whatever gets you on the air.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
Presenters and papers are needed for the upcoming VHF Society Conference in Georgia. Hams with a strong interest and some expertise in weak signal operating on VHF, UHF, and microwave are being invited to submit papers and propose presentations for the Southeastern VHF Society's next conference. Any subjects are welcome relative to RF power amplifiers, beacons, SDR, satellites, transverters, transmitters, and construction projects, and that's just for starters. In general, the conference is not interested in presentations related to non-weak signal topics unless there is also some relevance to amateurs using weak signals. Presentations can be submitted in Microsoft Word format to svhfs@downeasternmicrowave.com. The conference is taking place from the 17th through to the 19th in Macon, Georgia. Deadline for presenters' submissions is March 2nd. Presentations and papers are being handled by Don Woodward, KD4APP.
An annual occasion that celebrates strength, courage, and pride in a free homeland ended in tragedy in the Andes Mountains, even as amateur radio operators mobilized to help with their best efforts. Riding horseback across the mountains each year recalls a defining moment of independence for South American nations. This year's 209th anniversary ride of the crossing of the Andes under José de San Martín and the Army of the Andes led to an emergency evacuation for one rider in early February. As the mountain expedition began its return trip home through Chile in early evening, a woman suffered a serious fall from her horse. Writing in the forums section of QRZ.com, Carlos Amairon, LU7DSY, said that the San Felipe Provincial Radio Club, CE2REU, sent out a call for emergency assistance through the Chilean ham radio network. The rescue teams arrived, performed CPR, followed by an evacuation. It was later reported that the rider unfortunately had died from her injuries while being treated at the hospital.
The first satellite connectivity service goes into effect at the end of this month in the United Kingdom. Customers of Virgin Media's O2 mobile phone service in the UK are gaining access to direct-to-device satellite communication on February 25th. While some direct-to-device has already been approved in other countries, including the US, this is the first such license variation approved by Ofcom for UK mobile customers. In hard-to-reach regions where there is no cellular service, direct-to-device will allow customers to stay connected via text, phone calls, and internet with signals directly to and from smartphones. Virgin Media O2 is making use of the Starlink satellites in low Earth orbit.
The Artemis II crewed test flight, which was to have lifted off sometime early this month, has been delayed by NASA after the discovery of several issues, including hydrogen leaks in the Space Launch System tanks. In a statement released early on February 3rd, NASA said it completed a wet dress rehearsal for Artemis II, but determined the vehicle will not be ready to launch during the February window, which closed on February 11th. Several other issues occurred during the test. A valve in Orion's hatch pressurization system was accidentally vented during closeout work, requiring additional time to repressurize the system. Unseasonably cold temperatures, which had already delayed the rehearsal by 2 days, caused further issues, including delays in tanking operations and problems with cameras and other pad equipment. NASA also reported intermittent audio dropouts and communications among ground teams. The next launch period for Artemis II runs from March 6th through the 11th, with 5 2-hour windows available. Another launch opportunity extends from April 1st through April 6th. Meanwhile, as the agency conducts a review and reschedules a launch for March or April, the space agency has announced that its newly chosen group of volunteers to track the Artemis II includes 4 amateur radio operators. The 4 hams are Chris Swire, K1FSD of South Dakota, Dan Slater, AG6HF, and Loretta Smalls, AJ6HO, both of California, and Scott Tilley, VE7TIL of British Columbia, Canada. The hams will be using their radio equipment to track transmissions from the Orion over the course of its 10 days in space.
People in or near central Texas who rely on global positioning systems, or GPS, received a warning from the U.S. military base at Fort Hood that wide-ranging GPS tests there might cause interference with their own personal device. Farmers, pilots, smartphone users, and anyone else who relies on GPS to get from here to there have been paying close attention to the alert from the U.S. military base at Fort Hood. The announcement said that throughout February, the region including Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and even Oklahoma City could experience interference and disruptions. The final rounds of testing are to be held February 13 and 14 from 3 to 5 a.m. local time, and resuming nightly from February 15th through the 22nd. The final testing period is February 23rd through the 27th. Developers of open-source projects for amateur radio have a chance to be recognized for their efforts again this year with the Amateur Radio Software Award. The Amateur Radio Software Award is a global award encouraging innovative problem-solving that leads to sharing within the ham radio community. To qualify for the award, the software must be available for free download and use, must also be free of malicious hidden codes, and capable of being improved in collaboration with others. Last year, the award committee chose Sebastian Delmont, KI2D, and author of the popular Ham2K portable logger that's widely used by POTA activators. A monetary award accompanies the honor. Nominations are being accepted through February 28.
In a digital world, everything works correctly. But what happens when it doesn't? John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with the story.
Tino Milanovic, K8RBQ, a member of the All Things Amateur Radio Association, ATERA, in Lancaster, Ohio, said her club began asking that question a couple of years ago. What happens in a grid-down situation when the internet, tablets, and laptops and GPS are not available? In an emergency, how can first responders quickly navigate and travel to their intended destinations? Milanovic said that after some thought and some discussion, the answer was, well, old school, use paper maps. So in 2023, members of the ATERA began contacting the county engineering offices of Fairfield and contiguous counties to acquire fold-out paper county maps for their off-grid team members. The off-grid team trains to be able to respond and provide mission-essential emergency communications in a natural or human-made disaster situation in which amateur radio operators are needed to assist first responders or other emergency officials. The intent of having the paper maps was to ensure that team members could travel to an incident scene even if the power grid or internet were down and there were no GPS coordinates available. The idea blossomed, and the announcement fell from all Fairfield County emergency responders that they may also need paper maps when they travel in and out of the county or when providing mutual aid to other departments. So the Map Packs project was created. County engineer offices in the area were contacted and all generously donated a large quantity of paper maps for the Map Packs project. Once all of the maps were acquired, ATERA members assembled the Map Packs. The maps were compiled into sets and placed in a 9.5 by 12.5 inch water-resistant mesh zipper pouch provided for and paid for by donations from the members, said Milanovic. Feedback has been very positive. Fairfield County Sheriff Alex Lapp posted on the department's Facebook page, these map packs contain folded paper maps of Fairfield County and all of the adjacent counties. These maps are very helpful in the event of a modern technology and when it should fail. ATERA provided enough maps for all patrol vehicles and detectives. Milanovic recommended that amateur radio clubs and operators may want to consider replicating this map packs project for their communities. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
If your club would like more information regarding the Map Packs project, contact ATARA at president@ATARA-w8atr.fun.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
The director of the National Reconnaissance Office recently declassified the existence of JUMPSEAT, the United States' first-generation highly elliptical orbit signals collection satellite. Launched from 1971 to 1987 under mission numbers 7701 to 7708, JUMPSEAT was the product of the United States Air Force's program at the National Reconnaissance Office. Developed under a program called Project EarPop, JUMPSEAT offered the United States a way of collecting intelligence during unprecedented geopolitical change and Cold War tensions that lasted until the early 1990s. The National Reconnaissance Office in the United States Air Force, collaborating as part of NRO's Program A, were tasked with developing a foundational high elliptical orbit signals collection satellite to bolster the U.S. government's space intelligence portfolio. Named Jump Seat, the new satellite would be capable of operating in a highly elliptical or Molniya orbit. These orbits are very similar to those that were used by amateur radio satellites AO-10, AO-13, and AO-40 in the 1980s and 90s. Together, the National Reconnaissance Office and the USAF launched the first Jump Seat mission in 1971 from Vandenberg Air Force Base, which is now Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. Once in orbit, Jump Seat successfully collected electronic emissions and signals, communication intelligence, and foreign instrumentation intelligence, and valuable information that was downlinked to ground processing facilities within the U.S. From there, the data was provided to the Department of Defense, the National Security Agency, and other national security elements. Over the decades, Jump Seat satellites continued to prove their worth to signals intelligence, finally operating in transponder mode until they were taken out of service in 2006.
UNNE-1B is a 1.5 pocket cube which uses the same satellite hardware and software as the original UNNE-1, but will be launched with SpaceX instead of RFA due to delays in the latter's launch. As with UNNE-1, it will offer licensed radio amateurs worldwide the opportunity to relay FM voice and FSK-derived digital modes. The satellite will also transmit telemetry data reporting its status, a CW beacon, and a codec to digital voice message. All of this will be achieved through the implementation of an SDR-based FM and FSK repeater. The FM FSK repeater will always be available and will be activated by squelch level without the need for a subtone. As an educational payload, a small guessing game is being implemented by students from the Universidad de Nebrija in Spain. The satellite will send one clue per week within its telemetry, and radio amateurs will need to solve the mystery by collecting all the clues. Details of the game will be published on the AMSAT-EA and Universidad de Nebrija websites, with all data being public and open. With this mission, we will replace the SO-124 and SO-125 FM repeaters, as both satellites are expected to decay at the beginning of 2026, and Hades SA, also scheduled for 2026, supports only digital transmissions. FM voice repeating is a highly demanded service within the community as it enables long-range communications using simple setups. The CW beacon and the recorded codec 2 transmission also represent a small challenge for those wishing to receive them, especially the codec 2 signal, which requires the use of a computer and dedicated software. This may be particularly appealing to radio amateurs who enjoy exploring the digital side of radio communications. With this mission, we are also activating the VHF and UHF amateur satellite service bands for use by the amateur space community, proposing a VHF-UHF FM transponder and FSK 50 to 1200 BPS with telemetry up to 1600 BPS, customizable by command. There will also be a CW beacon. Launch is expected in June 2026 on the SpaceX Transporter 17 mission.
And our final story this week brings us to the ISS. Crew 12 has arrived aboard the International Space Station, and amateur radio operators, as usual, are part of the group. The ISS is back to its customary occupancy of 7 people, following the arrival on Saturday, February 14th, of Crew 12. They are NASA astronauts Jack Hathaway, KJ-5 NIV, and Jessica Meyer, as well as European Space Agency astronaut Sophie Adenot, KJ-5 LTN, and Russian cosmonaut Andrei Fedyev. In addition to the expected schedule of the ARIS contacts, Crew 12 will be kept busy with a variety of studies, including how physical characteristics have an impact on blood flow during spaceflight, as well as a look at on-demand intravenous fluid generation for space missions to follow.
Hi, I'm Terry Saunders, N1KIN, one of the anchors for This Week in Amateur Radio, and I have a few questions. Do you have a good radio voice? Do you have a quiet recording space, own a professional broadcast microphone and DAW software, and know how to use them? Can you commit to a same-day turnaround when given a script assignment? If you answered yes to all of these questions, and you're willing to volunteer your time to give a little something back to the ham radio hobby, then lend us your voice and join our anchor team for This Week in Amateur Radio. To learn more and see if you have what it takes, contact George Bowen, W2XBS, via email at w2xbs77@gmail.com or look him up on qrz.com.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard on nets and repeater systems all around the U.S. and around the world on great operations like WA0RCR from the center of the U.S., Wentzville, Missouri, where This Week in Amateur Radio is proud to be part of the legendary Gateway 160-meter net report each weekend. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.